Insect hell. Critter profile Genghis. Genghis is our name for an Australian locust who settled down here in good old Oregon. Assumedly, after Australia, he lived in neighbouring Wasco County, where his swarm caused a crop shortage. He was found when our experts determined that Genghis's swarm was growing at an unusually fast rate. Now, another thing that caught our attention was that Genghis was an Australian locust. These locusts are only found in Australia and New Zealand, and for good reason. Genghis is more adapted to the climates and conditions found down under. We were surprised that he survived, let alone thrived here. Our experts, yes, we've got some, wanted to run some tests, and that's where Genghis's specialities were discovered. Genghis is able to replicate into 2 locusts. Once Genghis eats enough food, he splits right in 2. Genghis and the new locust appear to be visually identical. To tell them apart, we gave Genghis a little splotch of tagging paint on his underside, which doesn't seem to carry over. You might think Genghis doesn't split that often, but boy does he eat a whole bunch. He especially loves it when Carl brings corn. That's Genghis's favourite, if I didn't tell you already. Genghis doesn't do much besides that, but there are certainly many things that can be done with it. As mentioned earlier, we discovered Genghis and gang in neighbouring Wasco County. If you dig a bit deeper, however, you'll find records of the rare Chortwacetes terminifera americanum, roughly American-Australian plague locust for you non-sciencey folk. These records go back several years, the earliest being about 13 years ago, around 2008. Of course, back then Genghis wasn't really active, but sightings around the lower west coast seemed to collaborate with our predicted movements of Genghis's swarm. We actually started tracking the new species in January 2021, but it wasn't until March that we actually got a chance to see Genghis's swarm in person. No sooner than our contact in Wasco let us know about the swarm, the terrestrial team was already driving out that way. When we got there, though, his swarm had been sprayed with pesticides. We corralled up a couple of the still-kicking locusts. The transport back was rushed, as we were trying to get as many alive locusts as we could. It would be a real shame if they all died. When we got back to Boring, there was only 1 alive locust left. Carl Heller was assigned to make sure the locust would be alright, and as you can tell, he's doing great. After we got the little fellow back, Carl asked me if he could name him after his favourite band, which I really had no objections to. I do the same myself sometimes. When he started calling the cute guy Genghis Khan, however, I asked if he could shorten it to Genghis, and that's how Genghis got his name. Special needs and accommodations. Genghis spends his days in Greenhouse 4, along with a couple of his fellow locusts, while the rest of his swarm is located in Greenhouse 5. We keep them in good order with plenty to eat. We receive shipments from Dant, full of crops. Carl brings in batches of corn every now and then as well, and by golly, they don't last more than a day. Now, we don't like messing with an animal's natural habitat, so we decided that every now and then we'd drive them to a special field in Wasco, where they can roam around as well as still be contained. There's a special mesh fencing around the place, so it's like a large green house. That being said, although, we just don't want Genghis and his swarm getting hurt. We don't want them to destroy our fellow neighbours' crops in Boring either. So we see our current greenhouse plan as a win-win, until we can find a safe habitat for Genghis and crew. Unfortunately, Genghis's swarm gets a tad bit too big sometimes, so we have to sell them off to scientific corporations for testing. It ain't in our hearts to sell Genghis's buds out like this, but it's what we gotta do. Notes about Genghis. Carl Heller, Genghis's caretaker, is suggesting Greenhouse 6 is given to Genghis's swarm for habitation purposes, so we can allow more locusts. The suggestion is pending review. Incident. On March 6, 2021, Genghis and his swarm escaped containment after Carl Heller's transport van was caught in a multiple car crash on a turnpike in Maupin. Carl was headed to our free roam containment area in Saarbrück and was carrying Genghis and swarm in a special containment van. The van sustained heavy damage and released their occupants. We have contacted our supervisors to help recontain Genghis and swarm. This has been a difficult loss for the terrestrial department, and especially for Carl. As you listen to the story of Genghis and his locust swarm, you can't help but feel a sense of unease. The rapid growth of Genghis's swarm and his unusual ability to replicate himself raises questions about the long-term impact of this species on the environment. The fact that Genghis and his locusts have escaped containment only adds to the ominous tone of the story. With their ability to devastate crops and the potential to spread to other areas, one can't help but wonder what the future holds for Genghis and his kind. As humans continue to manipulate and control the natural world, we must be prepared for the unintended consequences that may follow. The story of Genghis and his swarm serves as a warning that we must tread carefully, lest we bring about our own destruction.